Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the chat. I'm Andy Tomalonis, Managing Editor at the New Bedford Light. And we began this series of online conversations at the start of the year. And in that time since, our host, moderator, interviewer, Jack Spillane, has dug into so many topics, from Native American history to construction on New Bedford waterfront to reproductive rights. And tonight we've got something that should be really exciting. With us are the three Democratic candidates for Bristol County Sheriff. They're all hoping for your votes and the opportunity to challenge incumbent Sheriff Thomas Hodgson in November. So these online sessions run for about an hour, but this is likely to be a 90-minute session. So before I turn this over to Jack, I'll remind you that we record these sessions and we post them at the New Bedford Light, so you and others can watch them later. And I'd also like you to check out the Light's election 2022 coverage. We have a page for all the candidate profiles, stories, and videos about the local races. So you'll find the recording of this session, plus other content about the race, which is creeping up on us very quickly. It's the day after Labor Day. So anyway, I'll let Jack take over and introduce the candidates. Jack?
Thanks, Andy. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm hoping this can be a little less formal event than some of the other debates you may have taken place in. We do have, you do have the ability to question each other, and I'll have a lot of questions for you myself. And we will have some questions that may come in from our audience. If you feel that one of the questioners is connected to a campaign or not feel free to pipe up about it. So we do have three candidates tonight. We have Fall River attorney Nick Bernier. You're an attorney specializing in energy issues, Nick?
Yeah, my current law firm, which I own, specializes in energy. I do a lot of tax litigation, but then we actually represent a lot of developers and long-term asset holders around the country and a couple of in other countries. Okay,
and you've been active running political campaigns, run for several offices yourself, state rep, governor's counselor, city councilor in Fall River. Welcome.
Thank you.
We also have Attleboro Mayor Paul Heroux. Paul, you're a former state rep. You have a variety of experience in degrees in psychology and corrections. What am I leaving out?
We can talk about all sorts of things tonight. Yeah, I worked in jail, worked in prison, worked overseas, worked with kids, and I've been a state representative, and I'm currently the mayor of Attleboro.
Very good. Welcome. And Chief McNeil, welcome too. I can hear your dog. Usually it's my dog that's barking.
Yeah, they're barking at nothing. That's the thing.
Things. And I know Mayor Heroux also has a dog, so we may be joined by the canine vote tonight. Somerset Police Chief McNeil, you've had a background in law enforcement and had thought about running for sheriff when you were interacting with the sheriff and on the Police Chiefs Association. What am I leaving out of your background?
Well, I mean, I think we discussed this earlier, and obviously when your reporters were here at the house, we discussed a lot about that. Yeah, I'm 37 years in law enforcement, dealt with paramilitary organizations my whole career, which corrections is a paramilitary organization. So I'm very familiar with that. But I also have a master's degree in criminal justice, a bachelor's degree in animal science, because I went to school to be a doctor. And obviously I went into another field. And I was an adjunct professor at Bridgewater State for 11 years in 2007 to 2018, teaching almost every course that they offered, including corrections and crime theory. And I was chief the last 7 years in Somerset. And I was very progressive chief. I started a lot of programs. I started a lot of charities. Some are still in effect now. I started a 5K road race for a fallen police officer that raised $20,000 a year. That's still giving back to the community. They give the BJ Voss Foundation gives money to BCC in Somerset Berkeley Regional High School for people wanting to go into the criminal justice field. That still goes every year. We give $5,000 away with that. So that's something I started in 2015.
All right.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Right, I'm just
I'll
not
stop
gonna,
there.
I have no filibustering here tonight. So I'm
There's
gonna
just a lot to
feel free
talk. It's like
to,
Paul and like Nick. I mean, we could talk a long time about this sort of
yeah,
thing.
yeah, but I'm gonna feel free to jump in to keep it
Sure.
moving.
Yep.
So, Sheriff Hodgson's been in office 25 years. I think it's fair to say he's been controversial for most of that time. People either love him or hate him. We've had some impressive politicians from the Democratic side have gone up against him. Fall River City Councilor Leo Pelletier, who I know, Nick, you were involved in that campaign. We also had 2 state reps from the New Bedford area, Joe McIntyre and John Quinn, both tried and both lost. Why is this year going to be any different? I'll start with Paul. Why is this year different than the past attempts to unseat Sheriff Hodgson?
Well, I think Sheriff Hodgson has worn out his welcome. Over the course of time, he's gotten less and less popular, and the controversies have piled up more and more. People are ready for change. I've knocked on close to 10,000 doors at this point, and I've talked to a lot of voters, a lot of retired correctional officers. Some of them are still working there, and people want something different now. The public typically doesn't like somebody who's going to be a sheriff for life, or a senator for life, or a mayor for life. That's why I'm in my 3rd and final term as mayor. People like turnover, and I think that with the field that we have right now, we have 3 viable options to Hodgson, who are more in line with the values of the community, which our values align with rehabilitation, really focusing on that. So I think a lot of people recognize that it's just time for change. I mean, when I came in as mayor, I came in, I ran against the 2nd longest serving mayor, and he was just there too long. And actually, he knocked off the 3rd longest serving mayor, Judy Robbins, and she was just there too long. So people are ready for change.
Okay, George, why is this year any different? Whatever you want to say about Tom Hodgson, he must be popular somewhat. I mean, he's a Republican in the Democratic area, and he keeps getting reelected.
Well,
Why
I think I'm going to kind of reiterate a little bit what Paul said. He is more unpopular now. I mean, I've been out there on campaigning and getting signatures and meeting people since February, and everybody, I mean, really 90-something% of people I meet just say that he's been there too long. People I've talked to that work there, that have worked there, just people I see when I go to the gym or I'm out and about, they just say, oh, the guy's terrible. He worked there for a few years. And I'm not talking about guys that were just CEOs. I'm talking about sergeants, lieutenants, clinicians, addiction counselors that worked there, and they left for another job, or they just couldn't stand it anymore. They just said, the guy's not a nice guy. He treats us terrible. Never mind the people that are detained there. That's a whole nother story. But he's got a lot of excuses for things that go on there that can't be defended. He's got a lot of lawsuits that have to be defended, and it costs the state and the taxpayers a lot of money. And no matter how many times he says he wins those lawsuits, it still costs a lot of money to defend them. That's a huge point to be brought up. The other thing too is his policies towards inmates there are just antiquated.
Okay, we're going to get into the policies. So
okay, yeah,
we'll
but I mean, I think you get the gist of it.
We'll have plenty of time for that. Same question, Nick. The sheriff has been reelected three or four times. It's a 6-year term. He was first appointed by Governor Bill Weld. Somebody must like him. He keeps getting reelected. Why is this year going to be different?
He's a great politician. I mean, I'll tip my hat to him. How is this year different? The answer is I don't know. I don't know if it will be. I think it depends on how we run the general election. And I think some of the campaign, I remember the Leo Pelletier campaign. I was 18 and I was all excited because this guy was going to take out Tom Hodgson, but we ran what I call the F Hodgson campaign, where that was all we were doing. We were saying Hodgson's bad, the chain gangs are bad, look at the lawsuits, look at his boat, what's he doing? And I think when you run a campaign like that, it's easy for Tom to prevail because he is a likable guy. And he has a way of connecting with the suburban voter and winning Taunton and winning Attleboro and even winning Fall River back in 2010. So I think it's about the approach. And I think, George and Paul both hit it. It's about the policy. If we focus on our policies, and our policies are just so much better. You know, are we safer now than we were 25 years ago? The answer is no. And it's all about the policies. I think if we run on our ideas and we run on our approach, I think we win. I think we run and we make it personal against Tom Hodgson, we lose.
All right. So we're at 2022. As time has gone on, it seems that the sheriff's profile has gotten only higher with the Trump administration and the immigration issue. We've also had the rise of the group Bristol County for Correctional Justice that has really dived into some of his activities more than before. But all in all, he's the guy who runs a county jail. What is this primary going to be about, do you think? What is on the voters' minds? What are you hearing from the voters, George?
Well, it's a lack of rehabilitation, the consistent rehabilitation of people that are there, the lack of addiction counseling, mental health help, the lack of vocational training. There's people there that can't read and write. They just let go. They're not even given housing I've heard stories of when people are left there, if they can't afford a phone call because he charged for them an exorbitant amount of money to a private vendor to do that, which has now changed since the governor signed a new budget. Now that's free. So like his win with the SJC wasn't a win because now it's free. But anyway, his policies are just so antiquated. He thinks treating people poorly while they're there is not going to make them come back. That's such a myth. That doesn't happen. And Nick and Paul will tell you the same thing. I studied this stuff in textbooks. I studied corrections, and I know for a fact scared straight doesn't work. If you're trying to scare these people straight, saying, well, if we treat them poorly, treat them like crap while they're here, they won't come back here. That's so wrong. And I know some of his constituents want to see that, but that's just wrong. But the other point is he's got correctional officers that he can't keep there. They're all leaving because he pays them. He's the second lowest paid sheriff in the state. He's second lowest paying sheriff in the state, and they're working umpteen hours of overtime every single week, and their morale's at rock bottom. These are things that have to be addressed. Never mind the conditions at Dartmouth and Ash Street. They're very poor conditions there. That we can get into that later, but that's in a nutshell.
Okay, Nick, what's this election this year about? Is it about immigration? Is it about Ash Street Jail? Is it about the conditions for the inmates? What's it about? What are you hearing from the voters?
I think it's about 25 years, and I think it's having one person in power for too long. Tom Hodgson's been there for 25 years, and I've talked to a lot of people. One of my supporters is Nelson DeGavea. Nelson DeGavea ran Tom's 1998 campaign, 2004 campaign, and 2010 campaign. He's basically a de facto campaign manager, and he was the chief of law enforcement for Bristol County. And even he's sick of Tom Hodgson. And, he worked with him for so long, but eventually people want another viable option. And I think that's what they're looking for. So I think you have a lot of the more liberal Democratic voters looking for the best chance to win. And I think you have some of the moderate voters and even some Republicans who can't vote in this primary that are looking for someone that's a shift, but maybe not too radical of a shift. And that's why I think I bring a more of a moderate platform, at least in that regard.
Okay. Paul, what do you think this election is about this year? You've made the point that you're doing a lot of door-to-door campaigning. What are you hearing from the voters? What's on their minds?
Yeah, so three things to start. The mistreatment of inmates, the mistreatment of staff, and the mistreatment of funds. Hodgson, as Nick and George have noted, treats inmates poorly, and the American experiment was to create a new country where we did things radically different than the way things were done in Europe, where kings would oppress political prisoners. And that still goes on in some places throughout the world: North Korea, China, Iran, Iraq. And the way that Hodgson wants to make life miserable for people who are inmates there is how things are done in some other countries, that lacks, human rights and civil rights records. So that's one thing. Then you also have the mismanagement of staff. You hear about the patronage positions, the cronyism. You hear about people pay to play. If you don't donate to his campaign, or if you oppose, certain things, like political policies, then you're not going to get promoted. And, the people that get promoted are the people who have donated. So you have the mistreatment of the staff, and, you have people being hooked, working overtime, working, they're poorly paid. And meanwhile, you have these positions that are, kind of top heavy, management heavy. And then you have the misappropriation of funds. And that goes back to, a budget, is a reflection of priorities. And when we don't budget towards treatment and rehabilitation and with the aim of reducing recidivism, then, what are we doing with that money? And the sheriff has a lot of elements of his organization that have nothing to do with corrections, and, a sheriff in Massachusetts is tasked with running a county jail. So then you also have, what Nick had also said, I've put this on my literature, the Hodgson has been there too long, 25 years, that's basically, he wants to be sheriff for life. And, another thing I've heard is that the position has really gone to his head. And, I was knocking on one person's door and they told me about this situation where he went to school with his, one of his, I think it was his daughter, and it was a like parent teacher night. He just went right to the front of the line. And this person who I talked to at the door, he witnessed it. He saw Hodgson just go right to the front of the line, and everybody said, "Who's this guy?" It was like, "Well, it's the sheriff." And it's like, why does he's a parent in that context? But he just goes right to the front of the line. He jumped ahead of everybody else. And when the teacher was asked, the teacher said, "Well, he's the sheriff." Nobody appreciates that. That's gone to his head. And there's a lot of things I'm hearing. Virtually none of it is good.
Okay. So the sheriff has made a point over his career that he really believes that jail should be unpleasant, that if you make it unpleasant enough, people won't want to come back. And he's taken the weight rooms out. He's taken the TVs out. The food is said to be adequate, but I wouldn't say it's great. The phone call issues making it, the courts upheld him for it, but then some criticism of how difficult it is. But one thing that caught my eye in reading about the campaign, Nick, was that you had said that you thought that maybe the sheriff is right to a certain extent, that jail should be a little bit unpleasant. You seem to be trying to position yourself as a little bit more moderate than Mr. McNeil and Mr. Heroux. Tell me about what you think the sheriff is doing right and why jail should be a little unpleasant.
Well, I do that compared to a minimum security federal prison. And when you compare like different facilities, so I've actually been in the old Ash Street jail, and clearly that needs to be shut down. But I do think there's a balance. Should inmates have HBO? No. But at the same time, you have to give your correctional officers the resources to keep people in line and to give rewards. So one thing I do believe that all inmates should have a minimum access to their families on the outside, and that should be telephone or video conferencing, and that should be free of cost. At the same time, should they have unlimited television? No, absolutely not. Nutritionally, I believe we have to meet the dietary standards set by the state, and I do believe they should have nourishing meals. But should they get lobster and prime rib? No. I do think there's a balance there, and I think going too far to the extreme and saying, poor inmates too much, well, then I think you're playing at the Tom Hodgson's hand, because I think the average voter, the average suburban Rehoboth, Swansea, Fairhaven voter is going to say, well, you know what? Tom Hodgson's been there for 25 years. I feel somewhat safe with him there. Why do I want to completely change everything? So I do think we have to be a little bit incrementalist in this change. I don't think we can go from one extreme to another.
All right. What about that, Paul? Should jail be a little bit unpleasant, as the sheriff and even Nick say, or does that work to keep people from coming back?
Well, first of all, none of the three of us are talking about running a country club, and that's what Hodgson likes to paint as the alternative. If it's not Hodgson, it's a country club, and that's just nonsense. That's just fear mongering. People go to jail or prison for punishment, as punishment. They go there as punishment. Your loss of freedom is your punishment. You don't go to jail or prison for punishment. Your conditions are supposed to be humane, they're supposed to be fair, and in today's society, in a modern correctional facility, they're supposed to be rehabilitative. And if you're running a facility where the inmates are miserable, and then that's also it causes the staff to be miserable, in a dangerous situation with the staff as well, is the volatility. You also have a situation where the misery leads to a lot of suicides of the inmates, and we have one of the highest rates of suicide in the state. I believe, I think it is the highest rate in the state of all the county jails. So none of us are talking about making this a country club. You can run a rehabilitative facility by challenging the people who are there, in a healthy way, in a way that's constructive to their rehabilitative needs, pushing them on, the decisions they've made. It's looking for programming, encouraging programming that's going to help reduce recidivism upon release, and, really holding inmates accountable for what they've done, in removing, the idea in their head, for some people, that, getting locked up is a rite of passage. Other people, they've made a mistake. They made a mistake. They screwed up. Some people are never going to, get out of the life of crime, and they'll probably eventually find their way into prison. That happens. But when you have about 80% of the population who are there who have a substance abuse issue and/or mental health issue, that's when, if you're running an organization that is making life miserable for them, it's counterproductive to rehabilitation. And that's where I think, the incumbent has gone wrong.
Okay. George, what about the sheriff and Nick, to a certain extent, saying that jail should be a little bit unpleasant? Does that work to keep people from coming back?
I don't think in any way am I considering coddling anybody that goes there. They're there because, many times they've had 3, 4, 5 bites at the apple, and the courts end up finally incarcerating them. But again, it's a jail. It's not a state prison. Maximum sentence 2.5 years for misdemeanor in Massachusetts. In some states, in many states, it's only 1 year. Over 1 year, it's a felony. But in Mass, it's 2.5. So you get some serious criminals in there. Probably there are some. You get gangbangers in there. That's what classification is all about. They classify people when they come there, whether they're part of a gang. They can't put them with some other people, whether they're Q5, which means, if anybody, you guys may not know what Q5 is, but Q5 means that they're positive for suicide or attempted suicide. They can't be put in certain situations. So do I think they should be coddled? Absolutely not. They're incarcerated. They're in a jail. They're in a nasty jail. Both Dartmouth and both facilities are not nice, and the food isn't good. I've heard that. I'm not emphasizing that they be coddled or it be a country club by any means. However, that there are people there that a lot of people need rehabilitation, treatment, counseling, addiction counseling. One of the people in my camp is an addiction counselor. He said there's not enough. The sheriff does not. He has never done enough for these people. They die. I know a couple of situations where they have passed away recently. A couple of people that were my campaign staffer said that he lost people, and it's because they're not given continuous treatment, and they have mental health problems and are not addressed, and they don't give vocational training or housing when they leave there. And as I said before, they have situations where they don't have anybody to go to, so they just leave them in a parking lot and let them go. How is that person not going to commit another crime? I mean, they're going to steal something to live. Just common sense, a lot of this. But simply kicking them out and saying, hey, I did my job. Look, I treated them like crap while they were here. They're not under my domain anymore, so I'm all set. I think that's what Hodgson's whole idea is, that they're just not here anymore. But as chiefs in this county, you used to get the release reports every day. Paul, I don't know if you get them or not, but we used to get them every day, and they would say who was released. And if you look at the release reports from every week that they sent, you could see repeat people coming back and then getting re-released. So you can see that's recidivism. That's reoffending. So no, I'm more in the middle with this, and I believe they're incarcerated. Their rights are taken away from them for a period of time. Should they suffer more under the auspice of a sheriff? No, that's not the sheriff's job by any means. He's not a warden, and he shouldn't act like one, and he shouldn't try to put him in the town square and put him in shackles and whip him. That's not what this is about.
All right. My next question is along the same lines. And so I hope you won't repeat what you've already said, because we're getting some of this is coming out. But there's been a lot of talk about prison reform in recent years, and whether we really have made a mistake in trying to incarcerate our way out of the drug addiction crisis, and whether incarceration has really skewed to people who have a lot of challenges in life to begin with, and we're incarcerating them for relatively minor crimes. What would you describe as your own incarceration philosophy? Why don't we start with Paul on this one?
Okay, well, first of all, we can't build our way out of any crime situation. It just doesn't work like that. And the idea that we can just keep locking people up, and that is going, and if you make conditions even worse and worse and get tougher and tougher, and that'll solve our crime problems, it hasn't worked. It's never worked. And so we have to, part of my job as a candidate and also as a politician, both as mayor and as state rep, is to educate people and educate them on, like what the science of corrections is really about. And I used to write for the Huffington Post, and I wrote a lot about corrections in the Huffington Post, and we use that platform to try and, change the people's minds about how things should be. So you can't build your way out of a crime problem, and you can't basically sentence your way out of a drug addiction. So I'm glad that we are finally starting to treat drug addiction like a medical issue, a mental health issue. That's the right way to go. We shouldn't have, if you look at the history of why drugs in America were illegal, a lot of it had to do with tax revenues. A lot of it had to do with, Victorian way of thinking, and that's basically past in our society now. That's history to us. Some people still think like that, but in a more modern society, what we're trying to do is really treat people who are addicted with mental health, like regimes or drug treatment. That's the way we should be going. But to answer your question, though, it was a mistake to think we could incarcerate our way out of it. And also, as you said a moment ago, there's a lot of people who believe that, if you just make life miserable for them, then they'll smarten up and they won't come back. For people who have mental health issues, people have addiction, just doesn't work like that. They're going to end up right back in jail.
Yeah. What about prison reform, George? None other than President Trump himself signed the big national prison reform bill, trying to stop with a lot of these low-level drug crimes filling up the prison. Do you think we've taken too punitive approach to incarceration?
Well, no, well, obviously we can't arrest your way out of it. That was as a chief, that was one of the things the mass chiefs took on, was the fact that we can't arrest our way out of drug addiction, drug possession, drug use. We can't. That's the reason why the laws changed in Massachusetts. If somebody calls the police because their boyfriend or girlfriend's overdosing, and a lot of times they wouldn't call the police because they didn't want to get arrested because they were in possession of heroin or fentanyl. So they didn't want to get locked up. So they wouldn't call, and their boyfriend or girlfriend would die. They overdosed because they couldn't get Narcan. But so they changed the laws so people could survive and hopefully be rehabilitated. So you can't arrest your way out of it, nor can you incarcerate your way out of it. That's part of the reason why prison populations have been reduced so much. That has a lot to do with bail reform as well. For instance, the Bristol County House of Correction, Dartmouth, has between 600 and 700 people there. The facility can hold 1,192 people. Dartmouth can hold 266. The only reason why I know that number is because the address of Ash Street Jail is 266 Ash Street, and that's so many people are there. So you can't incarcerate your way out of it, nor can you arrest your way out. There has to be other methods. It's proven, it's evidence-based. All this is evidence-based. It isn't anecdotal. It isn't people telling, it's not people telling stories. This is all evidence that's been gathered over years. What's the best way to do this? And it's not to incarcerate people for low-level drug offenses. Everybody hears a story about, yeah, my buddy got caught with a joint, he did 5 years in state prison because he had a joint. Well, that probably wasn't the whole story, but, do I think people be spending, time in jail for possession of a small amount of drugs? No, they shouldn't. There's other options. many other
Okay.
options.
Okay, Nick, what about prison reform? Are we sending too many people for low-level drug offenses to prison? And does our prison system bias against the low income and minorities in a way that really tries to address socioeconomic problems with prison?
Absolutely. And I think to say otherwise is just kind of like being like missing the last 20 years of society. You have the difference in, in penalties for what they call that free-based or loose heroin, which is technically like not heroin, cocaine, which is technically a richer person's drug, versus crack cocaine is a much stiffer sentence. So that right there. I mean, as when I was a prosecutor, and I was going to show an old photo. I think it's on the website, but this was when I looked even younger. I was the youth court judge when I was a prosecutor in New Bedford Voc. And we used to take turns. And youth court is one of those great diversion programs that the Bristol County District Attorney's Office offers. And I think that we first need to get better data, because I think George is absolutely right. This person who was sentenced for 5 years or 5 months because, oh my God, I was just using marijuana. Well, no. What probably happened was they were charged with distributing quite a bit of the substance. But in order to prove distributing, you have to prove intent. They've probably been arrested on this 10 times. And to get rid of the case, we pled it down to mere possession. And then now they're serving their sentence, but the sentence is based on everything else. So I think some of this is also getting better data. So I do think we need to reform, but I think to make the right reform, we need to work. We can't just work as a sheriff's office. I think we have to work with our police departments. We have to work with the district attorney's office to see what the original charges were and how they were impacted. How they were amended, reduced, and then exactly what the sentence was and why that sentence was imposed. I think overall, though, I think Massachusetts has certainly gotten better. When I was a prosecutor, we decriminalized marijuana, which was really annoying because suddenly, George, I'm sure you remember this, there was a difference between fresh marijuana, which you could search, and burned marijuana, which was not probable cause for a search. So if you caught a gangbanger, to use George's phrase earlier, with a sawed-off shotgun in their trunk, and the probable cause was burnt marijuana, well, that sawed-off shotgun no longer exists. However, if it was fresh marijuana, the search was valid. The dog agrees. So I do think it's time for reform. I just think we have to be careful on how we do it, and we have to make sure we have the right data and that we're all working together on this.
All right. I just want to remind you guys that if you do have a question you want to ask the other candidates, just raise your hand one way or another, either on screen, and we'll try to work in a little bit of that. So a lot of this campaign that I've read about seems to revolve around 3 issues. What kind of experience you have, who's endorsed you, and whether you have enough money to run against Tom Hodgson with all his money. So let me throw that out to who are we up to? I think we're with George starting this time. What about the way the campaign has evolved around those topics? How important is experience, whoever's endorsed you, and whether you have enough money?
Well, I've been doing this since I'm 58. I'll be 59 in 3 days. Happy birthday to me with all this crap, all the stuff that's going, all the stuff we're doing now.
And if anybody else has a younger photo of themselves, in the interest of equal time, you can show.
So it's obviously Paul and Nick can attest to this. This is a very stressful time. Paul's been through it before. I haven't, so it's very stressful. It's kind of like being exposed. You're open to the world every day, and I'm a private person, so I'm not used to that. But I'm getting used to it because you have to. But my experience is in depth. I have actually hands-on experience dealing with people that were incarcerated. People I've arrested, murderers, rapists. I've arrested a lot of people in my time. I've booked them. I've watched over them as being detainees in the jails that I worked in Randolph, which is similar to Attleboro. I worked there for 28 years. I have a master's degree in criminal justice. As I said, I've taught thousands of people in the state university system. But I've run paramilitary organizations. That's a big difference. I've used to rank. So because corrections and policing are similar, in that there is rank. There's sergeants, lieutenants, captains, majors, colonels. It depends on where you are. I'm used to working in a paramilitary organization, so I understand that culture. That's a huge benefit I have running for sheriff. This isn't about big budgets. It's not about any of that. It's about, can you manage people? And I can. I'm good at managing people. I'm good at putting the right people in the right places. I always have been, not just as a chief, but as a lieutenant, sergeant. I always put the people in the right spots. That's why I've been to accreditation for so long. I'm accreditation. I'm a facilitator for the Mass Police Accreditation Commission now, and I go into police departments, big, cities and small towns, and I look at their programs and how their policies fit into accreditation programs. So I'm experienced in that part of it. So go as far as budgeting. I have had, many donors contribute a lot of money, but fortunately, I'm able to self-fund. I was told by Paul that I shouldn't be self-funding as much, but that's just the way of the world, and that's what I'm doing. So I'm able to self-fund. I think whoever wins the primary will probably get a good boost in funding from other people once September 6th passes and whoever wins. And then from that point on, I don't think we'll have to worry so much about self-funding. But until then, that's what I'm doing.
Okay, Nick, what about the endorsements? Are we making too much of who's endorsed you, who hasn't? What about the money? Is it important? Can you run a race without money? And what about experience? How is that a legitimate question to bring up? Who's got experience, who doesn't?
Yeah, I think all three are a factor. And I think all three of us passed all three tests. I'd say we can all raise money. I believe we're all going to have to raise money because Hodgson has over $300,000 in the bank, and I don't believe anyone's raised over 100. Never mind 200. So to afford TV or any meaningful way to challenge Hodgson, you're going to have to raise significant money, and I do believe the state party is going to step up there. As far as endorsements go, I've been blessed with a lot of them, but I think the ones that really matter to me are the correctional officers. Nate Medeiros has been working on my campaign. He's a union steward from Okofu in Dartmouth. So I've been drawing experiences from him, and obviously Nelson, who helped run the sheriff's office for years. So I think some of them matter more than others. I like to think mine do, because I'm getting knowledge from inside the jail and how to fix it from the inside, what's currently going on right now. I've also been inside the jail, so I've seen it firsthand. And then was experiences. Well, I guess I'm the only one that has never held an executive role in a public setting. I run my own law firm now, so I like to think I'm an executive, but I have advised a number of executives. I was the sole full-time attorney at the Fall River Housing Authority, which was I think $43 million budget, a mixture of federal and state funds. We dealt with every issue in the sun, including the mixture of federal and state procurement. And the answer to that is it's always the stricter of the two, the rules. So I do think because of that, I'd be able to handle the sheriff's job quite well, using the federal grants, applying for federal grants, following the state rules. For those reasons, I think all three of us check all three of those boxes.
Okay, Paul.
Jack, can I just step in for 1 second before Paul answers?
Yeah,
I just want to, I forgot about the endorsement part of it. So Patricia Haddad, 5th Bristol District, endorsed me first. The local 4 operator engineers endorsed me. It's a big labor union because I'm pro-union. And most recently, Massachusetts Police Association, which represents all of Massachusetts chiefs of police, wrote me a great endorsement letter. That was about 2 weeks ago. So I'm really proud of those endorsements. There are a couple more people have endorsed me. I just haven't published it yet. But those 3 endorsements are fantastic.
All right.
I'm sorry I broke into it.
No problem at all. Paul, what about endorsements? Are they the voters make the decisions on endorsements? What about experiences? Is that a legitimate question? And whether you have enough money, is that making too much of money driving politics?
Okay, so this gets to the 3 M's of a campaign. You have to have a message. The message has to be able to raise money, and the money has to be able to buy the media and do media buys. That's how you win a campaign. as far as the message goes, I'm the only one with corrections experience. I've worked in a jail, I worked in a prison. My my other two colleagues have not actually worked in a jail or a prison, as an employee. I worked in a mega jail system. The Philadelphia jail system has when I was there, it was 9,500 inmates. We had 100 admissions and releases a day. That pales in comparison. I mean, Bristol County is just nothing in comparison to that, the number of admissions and releases. My office was an intake. I walked by 100 inmates every single day, had conversations with inmates every single day. Oftentimes they would ask me if I was a social worker, if I was a lawyer, they wanted help, and so when I was working in the Mass Department of Correction, I was part of administration, I was director of research for the state system. So I worked in a jail, I've worked in a prison, I've managed a budget that is larger than everything my opponents have combined. It's $165 million budget as the mayor of Attleboro with 500 employees under me, and that's not including the school department where I sign off on purchase orders and appropriations and warrants for the salaries. I've worked with a dozen unions. I oversee 20 different department heads. So in terms of experience, I bring the strongest package to challenge Hodgson just on experience alone. When it comes to money, I did a quick search on OCPF before the debate, and George has taken in 74 donations and for a total of $20,000, and 17 of that was money that he put up. Maybe actually at this point it's 25,000, I believe put in, but 74 donations. Nick has taken in 199 donations, raised $46,000, and has put in 10,000 of that himself. I've taken in 749 donations. I've raised $90,000 and I haven't put in any money. So there's several things about that. And by the way, Hodgson has only raised 70,000. I've actually raised $20,000 more than Hodgson has this calendar year. He came into the race with $280,000, but he hasn't spent it wisely, first of all, but he's also only taken in 384 donations. I've gotten twice as many donations as Hodgson has. And the significance of that is people are investing in my campaign. They see me as the most viable candidate to beat Hodgson, because you have to, know how to, you can never govern if you don't win. And you have to have a track record of winning. This is my 9th competitive race where I've been on the ballot against somebody else. I've had 8 out of 8 successful ones. 5 of my 8 races, I got over 60%. One of them, I got over 70%. In fact, I got 78%. That was my first one. It was a Democratic primary. So if you don't raise money, you can't move your message. And if you can't move your message, you can't win. So that's why voters should look to see who has the best shot at beating Hodgson. I think either of my two challengers, my colleagues, Nick and George, would be better than Hodgson because of their values, but they don't have the complete package that I bring. As far as endorsements go, I pride myself on never asking for endorsements. I stopped asking for endorsements in 2014, and I've won my races since then, usually with over 60%. Endorsements sometimes come my way. Sometimes I'm kind of forced to fill out a questionnaire because I know my opponents are going to be filling out something. But I never ask for endorsements. Endorsements do not win races. Hard work does. Knocking on 10,000 doors, that's what helps. Making 1,500 calls, asking known donors for donations. That's hard work. An army of volunteers doing sign holdings and doing, door knocking on, the same days that I'm doing it, doing phone banking for me, holding house parties. That's the mechanics of a campaign that we're doing. And that's why I've had, twice as many donations as Hodgson and raised $20,000 more than he has this year.
All righty. I actually have been looking at the Office of Campaign and Political Finance financial reports myself, and I have some questions for all of you that I think may bring out some information. So we'll start with George. Who is Jennifer Furtado and Carlos Silva? Both gave you $300.
Carlos Silvera?
Carlos Silva?
Silvera.
Silvera, I'm sorry.
Yeah, he's my dog's veterinarian.
There you go.
And Jennifer Furtado. I think it says something when you find out who's giving people.
I believe Jen works for the school system.
Okay,
But Carlos is my vet.
okay. Is she a close friend of yours?
He's a good friend. We ride motorcycles together from time to time.
Okay. A gentleman named Bill Bissonette and another Nick Contos both gave you $162.50. That's an unusual amount. Why are they both giving you $162.50?
Are you asking me that?
Yes, I am.
Because it's a fundraiser and it was probably the price of a ticket, including Eventbrite
Okay.
fee that you
Unusual
charge.
ticket price.
Yeah, well, it's what I mean, it could have been like $75 a ticket, and that's what if you bought 2 tickets, it came out to $162.50. So
275 is 150, isn't it?
well, but they have a percentage that they add to the fee. To
Okay. I see. Pat had that endorsed you, but only gave you $50. What's that about?
She has it's a reoccurring Act Blue that she sends every month, that comes in every month. So I get a check every month from her.
Okay.
It's one of those things you can do on the cycle, like in a cycle.
Oh,
So
she's
every
spreading it out.
month the money comes in, a $50 check comes in from Pat.
Okay. Nick, in 2006, when you were running for state rep, former DA Paul Walsh Jr. gave you $500. Paul, of course, is from New Bedford. He's known as a political insider down here. What's that about? Are you close with the inside players?
Yeah, Paul endorsed me. I'm friends with Paul. He and I actually worked together on a couple of cases. When I left the DA's office, we had represented a couple of clients together. Paul's a great guy and recently married.
Yes, he is. A woman named Bethany Bartlett, who lists herself as general counsel for Kearsarge Energy, gave you $500. What's the connection there?
One of my clients, and actually I was inside house at Kearsarge Energy for a little while too. So she replaced me full time, and we still work together.
Uh-huh. This name jumped out at me because everybody will know him in New Bedford. John Saunders gave you $100. And the other night on WBSM, when you were asked who were some of your most important endorsees, you named John Saunders. Well, John, of course, is known locally as the point man for former State Senator Biff McLean. Suffered a conviction of a conflict of interest involving his public office. You had the whole JZL career thing. You have some, players that have been in trouble that seem to be close to you. Is that a fair criticism?
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of being New Bedford politics, right? New Bedford and Fall River South Coast politics. It was actually, I was at a fundraiser, John Saunders fundraiser. Biff McLean was there, and Tom Hodgson was there. It was a fun event because Biff was standing there, Hodgson, and John Saunders was standing near me. So I guess that's New Bedford politics.
I didn't see Biff on your contribution list.
No, he's firmly with Hodgson. I was trying to get him to switch. He won't.
Okay, and Hodgson was a fundraiser, but he didn't have to buy a ticket. What?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if if Hodgson bought a ticket. I bought a ticket because
Okay. We have Adrian. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. Brock, an architect from New York City, and Jonathan Marcos, a software engineer. $1,000 each. Who are they?
I was hoping we were going to get to that. Adrian is actually my college girlfriend, and Jonathan is her new husband. So they both maxed out when they heard, and she maxed out for this reason. She wants me to be the shortest sheriff in New England.
Aha. Okay. Well, I'm glad you're still on good terms with your ex. Paul, you made a big deal that you far and away raised the most money, and you just explained it. So I don't know if this question is a little outdated now, but you have raised far less than Sheriff Hodgson over the 20 plus years he's been in office. Can you really compete with him? Because he's going to be able to raise a lot of money. He's a statewide, even nationally known Republican if he wants to raise money.
I'm almost always outspent in my races because I spend more efficiently than my opponents. So Hodgson hasn't had a race in 12 years. So he's been building up a war chest over the course of 12 years. I thought about running for sheriff back in 2016. Instead, I ran for re-election as a state representative. But at the time, Hodgson had around $180,000. And then at the start of this year, he had about $280,000. He's actually spent over $100,000. He doesn't really have much to show for it. So, but I I've actually prided myself on being able to spend more efficiently. I mean, you know, I just look at how, you know, right now I'm sitting on about $36,000 or so, you know, maybe a little more than that, but it's, you know, there's, having the money come in is important because, you know, that's showing that the public is actually investing in you. I would rather have donations come into me, you know, from, you know, small donors, because those small donors are then going to tell, you know, other people, hey, vote for this person, because they're invested in that person, you know, whereas as opposed to just self-funding. I don't think the money is going to come pouring in after the primary. The money has been pouring into all the other Democratic primaries in the state all season long. Maura Healey raised $2.5 million in the first 6 months of the year. And, you know, she barely has a race. So, you know, the money has been pouring into other races, but it's not pouring into this one. So, you know, if we're going to really try and take on Hodgson, we really need to put somebody up who has a track record of, you know, success, fundraising, you know, corrections helps too. It's going back to the last question. But yeah, I mean, do you have, I mean, 750 donors just this year alone, 749 to be exact. I mean, any one you want to ask me about?
I do.
A lot of them I don't even know.
Nancy Hartley, is it, a Brookline lawyer who is with the Committee for Public Counsel? I assume that's a defendants group. She gave you $500. You know, some might say that's kind of close with the defendants for a sheriff.
I've never met her. You know, I've never, like I said before, people are who I don't even know are investing in my campaign. You know, and you know, they see me as the viable choice to go against Hodgson. So I mean, the vast majority of the donors I don't know. And so who else do you have?
Okay, here's one who caught my eye. Eleanor Bertain, a senior vice president with Wells Fargo from North Carolina, gave you $500. What's an executive with Wells Fargo in North Carolina interested in the Bristol County Sheriff's race?
She's a friend of mine from grad school. We went to Harvard together at the Kennedy School of Government, did our MPAs together. She also did an MBA from the Sloan School of Management at MIT. But when I was early in the race, trying to get what's called the seed money, you call up all your friends and family. And, you know, I called everybody I knew and said, hey, can you help me out? And, you know, a handful of folks from grad school chipped in. So yeah, she's a friend of mine from grad school.
I'm glad to see all three of you are staying on good terms with your old friends. Susan Heroux of Sandwich, is that mom? She gave you $1,000?
That's my stepmother.
Your stepmother, okay. Marlene Pollock, one of the leaders of the Coalition for Social Justice, gave you $500. And to her husband, Dean Gilbag, gave you $1,000. Dean's a longtime social activist. I think it's fair to say that they're on the progressive side of the spectrum. Some might say the far left. Any concerns about that?
No, I mean, Marlene and I met 3 years ago in Mansfield, and you know, she, you know, people had told her, hey, go talk to Paul. He's got a background in corrections. He knows how to win campaigns. He'd be a really good option to run against Hodgson. And you know, we stayed in touch loosely over the last 3 years, and then probably in November or December, I reached out to her, and you know, we started chatting more. And she said, you know what, Paul, I'd really like you to run, and all of BCCJ would. And, you know, BCCJ endorsed me. I didn't ask for the endorsement, but they endorsed me. But when you have 749 people donating, you know, you're going to have a wide variety. You have some people on the far left, some people actually are pretty conservative on my Rolodex too. But they, you know, it's a pretty good cross section of ideological perspectives. Some people I don't even know though. Some people I'm very close with, some people I don't know at all.
Okay. The campaign finance round is over, so we can all relax a little bit after that, including myself. So again, just remind you that you're free to ask a question if you want. There's been conflicting reports about overcrowding at the House of Correction. I think earlier, if I understood correctly, George, you had said that there were 700 and there's room for 1,200, 750, there's room for 1,200. But I also thought I had read something that you had said, Paul, that they're overcrowded there. Are they overcrowded there or not?
Who's the question?
George.
George. Okay.
They're not. The officers I spoke to one the other day because Paul had put something on I guess on Facebook. I don't know. I don't read you guys. I kind of pay attention to my own because I'm so busy with it. But somebody said, Paul, it said something about they were overcrowding, but they're not. It fluctuates because of, releases on a daily basis, people coming in, but there's no more than 700. There's somewhere between 600 and 700 people inside. The design capacity is 1192. So there's plenty of room there. Ash Street's capacity is 266. That's about what they have there. Again, it fluctuates day to day because people are coming and going, but no, they're not overcrowded.
Okay. Nick, did you have something on overcrowding in any of your literature? Are they overcrowded there?
No, they're not. They're not overcrowded. This is actually the perfect time. I think it's a perfect storm of COVID and everything else for us to kind of modernize everything. I'll take a look at that IC detention center and maybe turn that into a regional lockup and finally close down Ash Street. But no, we're not overcrowded right now. We have forced overtime. Maybe that's the issue.
Has it been a problem at all?
No, I do know that many inmates, and this will be something Hodgson uses in a debate, though he would say that many people choose Ash Street. And the only reason why someone would choose Ash Street, because you have deplorable heat and cold, depending on the seasonality, is that you have a single cell. That's because the cells are so small, you can't possibly fit 2 people in one cell at Ash Street. So the double cells I know are a point of contention for inmates in Dartmouth, but as far as overcrowding, generally, no.
Yeah, okay. Am I misunderstanding that, Paul? Has it been a problem,
Well,
overcrowding?
it depends on what you mean by overcrowding. So the Mass Department of Correction releases a population report, and that is they get their data from the DOC, I'm sorry, from the jails, but they also get the architectural design capacity from DCAM, Division of Capital Asset Management, and DCAM actually and DOC say that the Mass Department of Correction, the population, the design capacity, okay, the design capacity is 566. And that would put this is the most recent data going back to March, but that would put it at 120% capacity. Now that's, so whether or not you consider one inmate which is part of the design capacity as, the rated capacity versus 2 people per cell as the rated capacity, because the design capacity and rated capacity can be the same, but they can also be different. So if from the point of view that 2 inmates per cell is not overcrowded, as a rated capacity, yes. But as far as the, Dartmouth goes, though, the design capacity for it is 304. The rated capacity may be double that. And if the rated capacity is double that or triple that, because they've been creative with the, the housing of inmates, then you could say, no, it's not overcrowded. But when you're looking at what the actual design capacity of a facility, yes, these facilities are overcrowded. But again, it depends on how you define overcrowded. Are you using design capacity, rated capacity? Is it just a casual observation of 1 inmate per cell, which is what you were designed for? Or is it 2 inmates, which is what's rated for? So it's all in how the definition is placed. But the I think with the—
Would you like to stop double bunking them?
Say, well, it depends on, that's a classification issue. You shouldn't have somebody who's awaiting trial for driving under the influence with awaiting trial for attempted murder. Okay, you shouldn't have those, and that happens right now. And so I think we do need to pay better attention to how we're classifying and how we're housing our inmates, because some people might say, oh, who cares, they're just inmates, let them sweat it. No, that's how they do things in Iran. That's how they do things in Latin America, where people go in and they subjected to awful conditions, they come out worse, they go back into the community with diseases. That's not how we should be doing things. So your question though, should we be double bunking or signal? It depends on the inmate. It really depends on the person and what the classification decides is appropriate for that particular inmate.
I see. So recently there's been a little bit of tension in the campaign over a flyer that Paul, you sent out. George and Nick and George joined together to criticize you for allegedly breaking a pledge not to criticize fellow Democrats, I guess, in the during the campaign. You guys had a pledge. Is that fair criticism, Paul, or is it does a candidate have a right to compare and contrast without? Is that not?
Yeah, I mean, we have been comparing and contrasting all the time. I mean, George has said that he's the best suited to go against Hodgson. I disagreed and I put that on a mailer. I put it in writing. George, asked about Nick's experience to manage in the last debate. All of the points in the last debate were points that I put on my mailer. And the agreement that I had with Nick, and Nick and I go back a number of years, he's a fine person. When I reached out to him in January, I say, Nick, looks like we're in the race together. Let's not say or do anything to each other that's going to hurt each other in the general election. Those were the exact words, so that was a contrast piece. It wasn't an attack piece. All of the points that were mentioned were discussed in the debate, but with the exception of the point that George had voted in a Republican primary in 2016, which would actually help George in a general election. It might not in a primary, but it would certainly help him in a general election appear to be more moderate. So, there's a different, if somebody going nasty and going negative, no, even one of George's previous students, Marcus Ferraro, disagreed with the characterization that it was a dirty piece or it was a nasty piece or it was an attack piece. It was a contrast piece, and that's what we do in campaigns. Everything was, like I said, was discussed in the debate and nobody took issue with it. I put it in writing. They both took issue with it.
Nick, you sent out the press release saying that he broke his pledge, that he had gone negative. I'm sure you feel that way. Why did you feel that way?
Oh, well, I'm going back to that message back. I believe it was around January, and the message, maybe January, February. And I believe the message started because I believe Paul felt that George was saying negative things about him. And then if I had any contact with George, and I have the messages, I forget exactly the phrase, but to me, then I communicated with George, and I believe things were not, well, I'm not aware of what George did or did not do, but I hadn't heard anything negative about Paul. I certainly had not said anything negative about Paul to any of the committees I met with or anyone else. I don't think George did either. I didn't say anything negative about George. To me, a contrast piece, anytime you mention or refer to your opponent's name, and especially in a written mailer going out to like 30 to 40,000 households, there's a negative connotation. And if you have said that you're not going to go negative and you're not going to do anything to hurt someone else's chances in the general election, well, you don't mention your opponent's name.
I didn't. I used
anything kind of contrast.
I used your initials.
Come on, Paul. Initials, come on.
No, and actually, let me I have the history of it right here. So on January 15th, I reached out to Nick, said, good morning, Nick. Looks like we're both in the same race. If you win the primary, I'm going to support you 100%. And I'll also not say or do anything about you in the primary that would hurt you in the general election against Hodgson. Good luck, my friend. And then you responded a little while later on the same day. Of course, I completely agree. Short while later, George got into the race. And I asked you, because I had heard things that George had been critical of me, and I said, let's not be critical of each other. So it was about 2 months later, maybe about 2.5 months later, I reached out to you about, what I had heard George, going after me. But it was the idea, and the pledge was in writing, not to say anything or do anything that would hurt each other in the general election against Hodgson. It's a contrast piece. That's all it is. They were the same.
But the conversation continued, and I said, yes, I spoke with George. I think it makes sense for the three of us to grab lunch soon. I wanted to have the three of us sit down early on and have open lines of dialogue and communication to avoid exactly what just happened this past week.
How are you supposed to educate the voters on the differences in your experience, the differences in your backgrounds, even your positions, without saying something that you don't like about the other candidate?
I think, well, Jack, you just answered your own question. We're talking right now for over an hour. We had that debate at BSM. Those contrasts came out then. I think what surprised me and Nick was that Paul put it in writing the very next day. Obviously, it was put out before that. I mean, it just so happened the mailer came out the next day. But the fact of the matter is that he put contrasts in there that, well, we're incorrect. Of course, Paul said it's splitting hairs, but it's not. Okay. And I could get into a whole plethora of things about Paul did it again tonight. He started getting about, why he's more qualified. And it's very condescending. It sounds condescending to me because it sounds like a career politician, which is exactly what we're trying to get out of office right now, as a career politician. Because Paul talks about all the campaigns he won, all the money that he's got coming in, all the money he's bankrolled since he's been a politician. $165 million budget, 500 plus employees, but he's out riding his bicycle collecting signatures. These are all things I don't talk about, but it's there every single day. And I
No.
don't want, and I don't want to get into that. I just want to leave it alone. But those things, if people understood that, it'd be different.
I get it. It's implicitly negative about you, but when you send out a flyer with you in your police chief's uniform, isn't that implicitly saying the other guys aren't police officers and I am, so I'm better? I mean, why would you pose in the police uniform?
Because I as I said, I run paramilitary organizations. That's what corrections is. It's paramilitary.
Right,
Well, I think the
you
difference
didn't, they
there-
didn't. You did.
Jack, can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
So I would say the difference there is he's just saying that I am a police chief. He's not saying, well, Nick is too short to be a prosecutor. He's not saying a police chief is better than a prosecutor. He's just saying I am a police chief. A police chief is good for these reasons. And these are the reasons why I believe being a police chief more lines up with being a sheriff than, let's say, being a former prosecutor or being a former, working for DOC. And so I do think that, and I did want to correct one thing on the piece. So it says I'm 0 for 2 in elections. Technically, I had the same 100% win percentage in my hometown. So Paul is from Attleboro. He is 8 for 8, 100% in Attleboro. And I am 100% in the town of Swansea, topping the ballot in 2005 in the Swansea Charter Commission. My problem is when I do multiple towns, last time was obviously a recount in 47 cities and towns, but at least that's my experience as far as
you're comparing the Swansea Charter Commission to Mayor of Attleboro and state rep from Attleboro.
Well, he's comparing one office. He's saying he's 8 for 8 and I was 0 for 2, but my races were expansive over 47 cities and towns and multiple towns.
Nick, you also ran for state rep and lost in a state rep district. I ran for state rep and won in a state rep district
Your
3 times.
district was one community.
All right,
It's
so
still 40,000 people, 40,000, 40,000. It's the
All right.
size of a rep district.
all right. So clearly the feelings are going strong on this, and people feel deeply about what they feel on all sides of it. You guys have all said you're going to endorse each other. Do you still feel that way, given how deeply you feel about this issue about negativity? I'll start with Nick.
I think so.
You think so, but you're not sure?
We'll see how the rest of the campaign goes.
Okay, George?
Well, I put it this way, my mail is going out soon. And although what Paul put out in his, I wasn't happy about that, nor were people that, actually people sent me the mail and said, hey, take a look at this. They were more upset about it than I was. I think Paul was more upset that I was upset, but because Paul had texted me several times about it. And honestly, I kind of, after being Nick did that, that letter, I kind of just got over it. It is what it is, but I don't really hold grudges like that. That's not my style. Yeah, I will definitely support either one of them. I just don't, as I get back to my mailer again, my mailer is, there's nothing on there about Nick or Paul. This is about getting Hodgson out of office. God bless Paul and Nick and what they want to do. My mailer is to inform the public about who I am and what my background is. It's not to do a comparison about me and Nick and Paul. I understand what Paul's doing with the contrast. I get that. But if we start punching at each other as Democrats, then to go after Hodgson, who has a machine going, is going to make it more difficult for any of us who try to go after him. That's my opinion on it. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
All right, Paul, these guys have said some pretty pointed things. Are you going to be able to endorse them?
Oh, yeah, certainly. I do think that I'm the strongest person to go against Hodgson, and that was the case I was trying to make, because we can't, Democrats, us, none of the three of us can't win. If how shall I put it? We can. This is a winnable race, okay? But I really believe that only one of us is the strongest candidate, and that's me, because of my background, winning campaigns, running organizations, the corrections background, and but George is a gentleman. He's a professional. He's mature, and he is somebody who has good values. I think that I would be happily support him if he were to win the Democratic primary. Nick, I think, has good values. I think he's somebody who's definitely a step in the right direction away from Hodgson. Some people on BCCJ have called him Hodgson light, but he's still certainly better than Hodgson. And if we can't govern unless we win. We can't implement this shared vision of rehabilitation unless we win. And even though George might not like the fact that I sound like a politician, that's the experience that we need to win this race. That's what we need, because like I said before, I don't think the money is going to come pouring in like they might think it is afterwards. And we can't self-fund against Hodgson. It has to be a track record of successful fundraising. So yeah, I'll happily support either one of them. If I were to lose the primary and I would have tens of thousands of dollars left over, I would put that to work for whichever the two of them were to win. But it's a winnable race. We can win it, and like I said, it's we need to put our best foot forward against Hodgson. We have two other good people, but I think all three of us are good people, but only one has the experience in this world to actually get through and win against Hodgson.
Okay, so let's go back to some policy issues. Overtime has been a criticism that people have made of the sheriff during this campaign. Like a lot of places coming out of the pandemic, the Bristol County Sheriff's Office seems to be understaffed. You hear about morale issues up there. I'm not whether it's true, whether they're true or not. But what do you think is the problem with overtime and morale? You've talked a lot about this, George, during the campaign.
Yeah, I have a couple of friends that work there, and a couple of COs and I have rank. Obviously, they can't go public with any of it because they'll get terminated. And they've lost a lot of people just in the past year and a half. They're really way understaffed. I mean, some has to do with retirement, but a lot has to do with people just leaving because of poor working conditions for them, and it's become an unsafe place to work, which is a terrible thing to say. And they don't even realize, at some point, if the staffing gets too low, they'll have to. Just going to have to do something, call the National Guard in or something to help out. I mean, that's pathetic. And I realize a lot of sheriffs don't really care too much for their COs, is what the word I'm hearing, because I know I've talked to a couple people in other counties surrounding us, and they said most of the sheriffs really don't care too much for this. They don't really get too involved with the corrections officers, which will be definitely that's going to be part of my platform. Is I'm definitely going to spend some time with them, do more training with them, and heavily recruit and retain. That's so important to do that. But the morale's terrible. They're all working 30 to 40 hours overtime. In fact, some of them text me. I text them back, and I don't hear from them for a day because they've been sleeping the whole time because they're working so much and they have to work. I've been shown text messages from the superintendent threatening termination and things like that. It's just inappropriate, poor management. In my years of managing police departments, I've been a supervisor since the early 90s, and I was lieutenant for 11 years and a chief for 7. And I've overseen lots of people in it directly as police officers. And morale is in everyone. It's not just from the top down. And morale is poor, not just because you throw a lot of money at them, like overtime. It's just the working conditions that they're in. They just have terrible working conditions. The food that they get, if they work past midnight, they have to order out and they have to get crap food because they don't serve them food there. That's just an example. And it's unsafe because they have one person watching a lot of people. I'm not gonna say how many people, a lot of people. They're running chow lines with people chow lines. They don't have a CO to put in there. That's unsafe. You don't have a corrections officer inside a chow line while it's being served food. How is that for morale? That's just it's unsafe, period. So those things need to change. And I'm a big advocate of that. And if I become sheriff, I'm going to really work on recruiting and retention of COs, not giving people political hookup jobs. It's going to work on retention and recruiting of COs.
All right, Nick, what about, have you heard that there's a morale problem with the correction officers and a lot of overtime? Can that be justified by the difficulty of getting people to work there with the pandemic? And something else I read in one of your profiles, I believe it was you, that you think that there's a problem with drugs at the jail, and that the drugs are reaching the inmates. Was that you?
Yeah, all the above. So, and I hear this from attorneys. I've been there myself. I had a mother call me from Rainham back in, I believe it was November. She called me and said, "Thank God you're running," because she had picked up her, I believe it was 19-year-old son. He had some issues. I believe he did about a 3-month stint in Dartmouth. And when she picked him up from the jail, he was high. So where else did he get the drugs? He got the drugs from inside Dartmouth itself. And it's a notorious problem And, you know, you'll have Hodgson will probably blame the lawyers, and the lawyers are going to blame Hodgson and possibly the correctional officers. But the answer is just more uniform screening and better screening procedures, because you don't see these same hiccups the same degree in federal lockups. And we have a federal facility right next door. As far as the morale is absolutely horrible. Nate Medeiros, I told you, was helping me out, his overtime shift, or his forced overtime shifts, changed once it became apparent that he was outwardly supporting me around amongst the other COs. And he's been through everything right now, and I commend him and I thank him. But besides him being punished for supporting, for voicing his First Amendment rights, it's rampant. The forced overtime issue is absolutely rampant. People there who have been there for 5+ years are still being forced overtime. And it's just like George was saying, you can't get anyone because they're so low paid. But I would say this, Tom Hodgson is a brilliant politician, because he's taken all of this negativity and he somehow blamed the legislature, because there was a bill actually was sponsored up in Attleboro. I believe it was Jim Hawkins is one of the co-sponsors from Attleboro, for pay parity. Pay parity would bring all of the jails in line with DOC. There's issues with that, but Tom Hodgson's pointing at this, and this is the reason why his correctional officers aren't being paid properly, is ignoring the fact that for years of collective bargaining, he has time and time again pushed them and lowered their pay and kept their pay absurdly low, the second lowest in the state. So really has less to do with this issue that Tom's trying to create with his COs to try to increase a fake morale for the election, and all to do with his mistreatment over the past 25 years. And I believe this dates back to the Leo Pelletier campaign, when the Correctional Officers Union actually backed Leo, and they were punished severely after the election.
Okay, what about you, Paul? I believe at least some of the time the Corrections Officers Union has endorsed Hodgson. Are you hearing that forced overtime is a problem, that morale is a problem there? And what about illegal drugs reaching the inmates? Are those all problems at the jail?
Yeah, so morale is a problem. And, the way that some people in the Bristol County Sheriff's Office are treated better than others based on their support for Hodgson's political positions or his campaigns. There should be no place for that in a paramilitary organization. That's where people are unionized. I mean, that's just the wrong way to lead an organization like that. As mayor, I deal with almost a dozen unions. I've had to negotiate with different unions. Some are tougher than others. We always do what we can. If I can do something, I'll do it. If I can't do it, I explain why. And that's fair. But starting with restructuring, at the top, where you have a lot of patronage positions. Now, under me, I'm not going to, fire anybody. I'm not going to say, you're gone, you're out of here. I mean, unless there's some, compelling reason, some egregious violation, but what we can do though, is we can restructure and say, okay, we're reorganizing how we manage our jail. And there's going to be positions, we're going to create new positions in treatment, rehabilitation, and some of you folks who have been working, you can go ahead and have a first shot at, one of these jobs. A lot of those folks are not going to want to. That's going to free up a lot of money to reallocate towards better correctional officer salaries. It's going to free up money to hire more correctional officers so we can reduce the amount of overtime that they're being hooked with. And, and people do, I've talked to a lot of correctional officers. They've called me, they've reached out to me, I've knocked on their doors, retired, current, people that have sued and won against Hodgson in federal court. I knocked on that gentleman's door. He lives in New Bedford, and he was, he told me, he said, yeah, morale is terrible. It was then, so there's different things you can do. It's also having an open door policy. You have to go through the chain of command, but if somebody's not happy with something, come and talk to me. Sometimes that happens in Attleboro. I've got 500 employees under me, and sometimes people are not happy about stuff. In 2019, one employee posted something on social media about me that was very poor taste, and I called the person into my office and I said, what, that's your First Amendment right. Well, what's bothering you? What is it? Why are you angry? And he told me. And I said, talk to me next time. If you're not happy, I want to know about it. I want to be able to do something about that. When I was working one of my jobs over my, career, I had a boss that was absolutely horrible to me and, put me down, held me back, took credit for my ideas. And I learned a lot about what not to do, in that, from that particular boss. When I was working in Philadelphia, I worked directly for the commissioner of the Philadelphia jail system, mega jail system. I learned a lot from him. He was an excellent boss. And, so it was, and I took those, both the good lessons and the bad lessons, and apply them to what I'm doing right now as mayor. And, so I'll bring a different perspective, to the job than the current sheriff has right now. He's far too political, far too political. He says about public safety. It's not about public safety. It's about his ego. It's time for change, and it's time to have, somebody who's going to actually take care of both the employees and the people that are in their custody.
Yep. All right. So we got about 10 minutes to go, so I may go a little faster here. I haven't brought up immigration tonight, but the sheriff talks about it a whole lot. He did run the ICE facility, which was eventually shut down because of the way the federal government felt he was running it. But is there? Why don't you talk a little bit about your views on undocumented immigration and whether there is a need for an ICE facility? The federal government has had these sheriffs running them. What do you think about this issue of undocumented immigration and the Bristol County House of Correction, Nick?
Well, I'm absolutely against what they call 287G agreements with ICE. I don't believe we should be enforcing federal immigration law in the county. I believe in federalism. I believe you have a separation. You have federal officers enforcing federal immigration law, and then you have state and local officers enforcing state law. And I believe keeping that separate is important. I'm also a proponent, and I believe we covered this in the last debate, but just to quickly rehash, in favor of licenses, because I think having licenses for undocumented people makes the roads safer. It's safer for the officers that pull them over so you can get a positive ID. It's safer so they can actually be insured. So if you actually hit one of these motorists, your insurance isn't paying for it. Their insurance is paying for it. I think it just makes the roads and everything else safer. I think federal immigration is a federal policy, not a state, and certainly not a Bristol County Sheriff's Office policy.
Okay. What about that, Paul? Is there no role for local sheriffs for undocumented immigrants who may transgress the law and get in trouble? Is there no role to try to deport them quickly?
Well, no, I think you arrest them.
Paul.
Sorry.
Okay. We should leave federal laws to the federal government. That's their role. The job of a Bristol County sheriff or sheriff in Massachusetts is to run a county jail, care, custody, control, and rehabilitation. We treat under my tenure as sheriff, I would treat everybody the same. You treat people differently based on classification, but everybody is treated the same. It doesn't matter, what you're sent to my walls for. You're going to be treated the same with the same level of humanity and respect and dignity as anybody else. We're still going to challenge you. We're still going to push you on rehabilitation. We're still going to hold you accountable. It's not going to be a country club, but everybody's going to be treated the same. The job of the sheriff is not to judge people. They've already been judged or they're waiting judgment. The job of the sheriff in Massachusetts is to hold them in a lawful way and to release them into the community better than when they arrived. That's why we call it a house of correction or a department of correction. It's to correct their behavior. And so, I don't think, the current sheriff Hodgson, he's being sued right now by 16 plaintiffs for $10 million for violating their civil rights. And, just because they might have been whether they were awaiting trial, they were here legally or illegally. In fact, one of those plaintiffs, I believe, is a U.S. citizen. The person's not even here illegally. We still have a constitution. Most of the Bill of Rights concern the treatment of, criminal justice issues. The Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, the Seventh, Eighth Amendment, those are all criminal justice issues,
Okay.
right to a speedy trial. So, Hodgson, he's judged the people in his custody, and I think that's dangerous. I think it's costly, and I don't think it's very American.
Okay, I'm going to go a little more quickly now because we are coming down to the wire. George, what about it? The sheriff has actually made a little bit of money, I think, with the ICE facility. Isn't there is there anything we should be doing with undocumented immigrants if they get into serious trouble with the law?
That's like Paul said, and Nick, it's a federal issue. It's not our issue. I think at the time, because Trump was a president, he took the ball and ran with it because he had the backing. But that he's a Bristol County sheriff. We should be concerned about Bristol County issues, not federal issues. It's not sheriff of this county is not should have nothing to do with that. And he got way too involved with it. And I guarantee you, at the time Trump was in office, that he believed that Tom Hodge was a law enforcement sheriff, not a jailer. I think if Trump knew he just watched over jails, he probably wouldn't have had him in his office and giving him awards.
In other words, the sheriff, like in other parts of the country where they have a law enforcement role.
Correct. When they have unincorporated territories with the sheriff's departments, police, which we do not have in Massachusetts. So, and I guarantee you that Trump believed that he was a law enforcement guy, that he had a bunch of deputy sheriffs out there locking people up, which he doesn't. And so, that he completely changed the narrative with the president at the time. And I can just 99% guarantee you that that's what the president thought at the time. But whatever, he fooled the guy, whatever.
Can I have 10 more seconds on that issue?
Absolutely. 10 seconds.
The immigration issue is an emotional issue that Hodgson, as a master politician, has tapped into, but it has nothing to do with his job. The Massachusetts sheriff has no statutory authority to do anything on immigration, so all he's doing is running his mouth. He can advocate in one direction or the other, but statutorily, he has no authority to deal with immigration issues.
Okay, we have 4 minutes, so I'm going to try to wrap up two questions one question I wanted to get to, which we haven't had time, and that's suicide, the high suicide rate at the Bristol Honeycomb Correction. How would you approach that? And the other question is, any final remarks that you want to say, you want to give? We'll start with Paul.
Okay, so people who commit suicide or attempt to commit suicide, they do so out of a sense of hopelessness. I have a bachelor's in psychology and neuroscience. I spent time researching this, and I've also worked on it working in jail and prison in the past. It's that feeling of hopelessness that things are not going to get better, and that's why people are going to go ahead and commit suicide for the majority of cases. The research is very clear about that. So the fact that Bristol County has the highest rate of suicide in the state out of all the county jails, also has the highest rate of recidivism, which is a testament that his approaches aren't working. But the fact that it has the highest rate of suicide is a testament to the fact that the inmates feel hopeless. They're not being rehabilitated. They're not going back into the community better than when they arrived. The current sheriff is not addressing their risks and needs to reoffend. He's not setting them up with discharge planning, housing, healthcare, and a job. Once somebody leaves our walls, the jail, we have no control over them. There was no more custody over that person. But we can set them up with a discharge plan. And if somebody has a discharge plan, then that's going to give them a sense of hope that they can actually get back on their feet and they won't reoffend or commit suicide.
Okay, I apologize for rushing you, but we do have to make this a time cutoff. I'll go to George next. How do we get the suicide rate down? And what are your final comments?
Well, the suicide rate is high for everybody. It's high not only for inmates, but correctional officers and police officers. Suicide rate's high for everybody, especially in this area. I've lost friends to it who are police officers that committed suicide. But the mental health issue is not addressed, which needs to be addressed. And if we address that mental health issue, we have clinicians go in, talk to these people, find out if their suicidal tendencies are. Many go in there with positive Q5s, which means they have tendencies they said they want to commit suicide. Those people need to be helped specifically because they've already made the inclination that they may want to commit suicide. So we need to especially watch people like that. My experience with it as a control chief for the law enforcement council in this region of Massachusetts, I had a close relationship with Chief Perkins of Middleborough, who was a control chief for the critical incident management team, who actually watched over police officers and others, firefighters who were been involved with critical incidents and managed people that potentially would commit suicide. So I have a real, there's a fondness for this, and I want to say that that's going to be something that we focus on, not just for the detainees there, but for the COs, to make sure that this doesn't happen to them.
All right, we got 1.5 minutes left. Nick, the suicide rate some years. The Bristol County has been higher than other counties. How do we get that down? And
I think it's
whatever
far
final-
worse than we even know. I think if you look, you have to look also after people leave the facility. I actually lost a friend to this. He was incarcerated. He was a veteran. He was prescribed lithium. It's a common problem actually amongst facilities around the state, but especially in Bristol County, when people are denied their properly prescribed medications. He was denied lithium. When he was released, he was out of balance. He ended up taking his own life. So I think that you have to properly medicate people while they're incarcerated. And I think that's important. I think it's something that's also overlooked. Some people end their lives in jail. Some people end their lives soon after they leave, Dartmouth or Ash Street. And it's because of how they were treated in Dartmouth or Ash Street. And I think that has to be looked at as well.
All right. I want to thank all three of you. I think it's fair to say that you've all been well spoken tonight. I hope I gave you all plenty of time to get your messages across, and good luck on election day and all the days leading up to it. when
Thanks,
people
Jack.
can
Goes
vote.
by quick, doesn't it?
Thank you.
Thank you,
All right.
gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
And definitely get out and vote.
Definitely.
Early and often, right?
Very
That's right.
quickly. In mail-in voting is coming up even faster.
Yep.
So thank
Have a
you,
good,
everybody.
have a good night, everybody.
Thanks for the candidates and good night.
Right.